joining us again as we discuss Dethroning Mammon, the Diocesan Lent Book for 2017. I'm joined today by Dick France, who's a recent lay reader from Trentham, and Helen Babby's with us again, who's also a reader from Emmanuel Church Bentley. Thank you both for coming today. So we're on to chapter 4 of the book. What we receive, we treat as ours. And this is a chapter, isn't it, where he talks a lot about the link between money and power. Can you just explain a little bit about how that works? Why are money and power so closely correlated, do you think?
Well, coming from the business world, and thankfully retiring recently, I've seen it so often where people abuse the power. And what Jesus has done is turn it the complete opposite way around and almost transfer the power to the disciples. Not almost, he did, didn't he? By the washing of the feet, which really struck me very strongly in that chapter.
It is. So exactly, in this chapter, he takes us to that episode in the upper room where the disciples are all gathered for supper, and Jesus is the one who gets down on his knees and washes the dirt from their feet. Helen, I wonder, as you think about what happened then, what must it have been like being one of those disciples, having, Jesus, the person you follow, the person you look up to, your teacher, get down and do that for you?
That's it. It must have been really shocking. Because if you think of someone today, in authority, that you wouldn't expect them to come and, do something like that, and do something so menial as well. And to have that as a model, and for him to then say, this is what I expect people to do, that's even more shocking, because that takes away all your sort of ideas about yourself and your pride and, I'm part of Jesus' gang, maybe, that sort of thing.
One of the really interesting things I think in that story is when Peter says, no, don't do that. And that sort of attitude of resisting the grace that Jesus is offering to him. And I wonder perhaps if we are guilty of that as well sometimes with respect to God. Do we feel like sometimes we want to resist and say, no, don't do that for me?
It's maybe the feeling that you want to be dominated because you've been used to it in the business world. And I think it's a wonderful model for business to be able to develop the people under you and say, rather than dominating them with a sort of power and fear, you say, I'll help you do this. I'll help you do that. And they grow and they develop. People feel threatened when they're in a senior role that if they develop someone under them, that they're going to take their jobs, which happens now and again, of course, but
but
in the long run.
You see the really great leaders are the ones actually who say, I want people around me who are going to be better than me, who I can, put in those places who are not threatened by them. Helen, I know you work with an organisation called Poverty of Truth. I wonder if you can say maybe from sort of the other end of the economic spectrum, how power and money, or perhaps the lack of power and lack of money correlate.
It's one of the things that they speak about a lot is the way that the system and the people with authority and the power sort of use that to sort of keep them down, and it's almost rather than raising them up and helping them, they feel that it sort of denies their sort of value, and it denies them a life. Really, they can't do what they would like to do, and it's just the simplest thing that pushes them back down, and they see money and power then as a bad thing, and so they're so used to not having money. I think if they got to a place where they were quite comfortable, I think they would struggle. Struggle because they only see that power in it and the authority and the stamping down against them, and because they're relying on who they are, that's a bad thing to them. They want to stay true to themselves.
I think Jim Carrey said he'd gone through a lot of problems after his celebrity.
Yes.
And he said, I'd love everybody to experience huge amounts of wealth and power so they'd realise how miserable it made them.
Yeah.
Everybody in the world, he was sort of pushing it in that way.
Yes.
But of
Isn't
course
that
they
interesting?
can't.
We all look at it and think, well, that would make me happy if only
Yeah.
I had this or that or the other. But actually, for someone with that sort of wealth to say no,
Yeah.
no. He talks, certainly towards the beginning of the chapter, a lot in terms of grace. And that's the point of the chapter title, isn't it? What we receive, we treat as ours. But actually, everything we have is given by God, is a gift of grace. How does that transform perhaps the way we would view both money and the correlating power that comes with that, if we see it as a gift, if we see it as an expression of God's grace? What perspective might that help us
I
have?
think with God's grace, it's so massive and it's so generous and it's so abundant that you couldn't keep it to yourself anyway, because it would be a case of, well, that's a bit too much, it's really too much, too lavish. And as you've received it as a gift, then you'd like to pass it on as a gift, and it's that passing on, because there's always more. And I think if you try and keep God's grace and the good things that God gives you, it becomes corrupt in a way, because you've got almost too much, and if you don't pass it on, you're not doing what God has told you to do with it.
I love what you just said there about there's always more, isn't there? That's the thing that stops us wanting to pass things on, is that sort of, well, I've got this, but how do I know if there will be more? But actually knowing there will be more, knowing it's a gift, gives us freedom to do that.
And relating this to wealth as well.
Yeah.
I mean, people obviously equate it, myself included, to a fair degree of security.
Yes.
But actually there isn't any.
No.
There's none whatsoever. You can move things on in life a bit quicker when you've got a bit more money, but one thing, a quotation that the Archbishop made with a study at Princeton University about well-being, suggested emotional well-being rises with income up to $75,000 a year,
Right.
which is equated to roughly £50,000,
Yes.
above which no additional well-being
There you go.
is observed.
Isn't that really fascinating? Yeah, actually, because I think it's foolish to say it makes no difference. And when you're dealing with people who really have very little, of course it makes a difference whether you've got, reasonable housing or reasonable education or all those kinds of things. But actually 50,000 is not, it's not what we would normally think of as huge wealth, is it? It's comfortable.
It's a good, comfortable salary. But
Absolutely. But actually,
it's not massive.
beyond that, no measurable increase in well-being. That's really fascinating. I love something he said about thinking about the money that we have as an opportunity to love others, or not just the money, but the resources and the possessions that we have. If we were to think about it in that sort of way, that everything we've been given is an opportunity to love others, what might our society or our churches or our lives begin to look like if we were thinking in those kind of terms?
It would look like the kingdom, wouldn't it?
It really would, yeah.
It would.
Yeah, I mean, what might we be doing to sort of put that in practice, do you think?
If one adopts the view in your heart that it's God's grace, there but for the grace of God go I. I could have been born in Syria in the present conflict. It's pure
absolutely
luck.
wisdom. Yeah.
So I've done nothing to be in a comfortable situation at all. So I think if one can accept it's through God's grace, then it must affect your giving.
Yes.
Whether it's time, whether it's money, whether it's your other gifts that you've got. And I think that's, rather than keeping it to yourself and thinking it's all mine. Because people use families as a reason for not giving.
Yeah.
I'd rather give it to my children. But
yeah, and it's not wrong to obviously want to give things to your children,
of course
but
it isn't.
to have that spirit of generosity to others that are very close to us, but also to others who are perhaps further away from us. Perhaps we were talking in an earlier chapter when we had about the people we don't see, the people we overlook, or as you were mentioning there, people in other countries who are in just desperate need. Actually, if we have that spirit of generosity, it's going to transform how we relate to people in all those different situations.
People rob banks in order to so-called feed their families, don't they?
Yeah, absolutely.
So,
but actually, we have an opportunity to love people with the resources we have. So here's my challenge for you this week, and it's a simple one taken from the passage that we've been thinking about where Jesus washes the disciples' feet. Find an opportunity this week to wash somebody's feet, to do something for them, to show that generosity to them, to show that you're using the resources that you have to love them rather than to dominate or to exert power. How could you wash somebody's feet this week?